John Vieweg is a multidisciplinary designer based in Brooklyn whose practice, TheHighKey, operates at an intersection of physical and digital design and explores how objects and spaces can shape more human, emotionally resonant environments. The studio has worked across furniture, spatial concepts, and experimental installations, often blurring the boundaries between function and expression. And central to John's work is an interest in the in-between, meaning those liminal spaces where materials meet digital, concept meets utility, and design becomes a quiet mediator between people and the world they inhabit, which is why in today's chat we'll be conversing about exactly that. So thank you so much, John, for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And the pleasure is ours. So, will you first tell us about yourself and the studio, and then what led to the birth of Heike?
Yeah, it's an interesting background story. So I graduated out of my master's of architecture. I was formally trained as an architect. I had a real interest in digital tools. And at the University of Michigan, we were working with robotics, digital technology, rendering. And I just became fascinated at the intersection of the digital tools we use and how those come to life in physical space. So I graduate out in the pandemic, completely no idea what to do, trapped inside. And I just said, I have to like leverage my creativity in some way. I started building concept furniture. We very quickly started exhibiting those pieces at large scale events. And I was just surveying the scene of Brooklyn, the real built environment. I have a penchant for taking really long walks and just studying, exploring. And I think that led to some of the work that came out at that time, and as well as the scenography and where we decide to capture and how we decide to capture these pieces. It's really incredible, especially in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, or some of the industrial sites. You get to see these messy in between spaces of manufacturing, design, and storage. And I just became fascinated with the logistics, the frame around the objects we create. And, it's that frame, it's that context that allows the pieces to have impact.
Yeah, super cool. I think that's a very cool start. So, this is maybe a profound question to all
Sure.
designers, but what is design to you? And especially when you stand at the intersection of the physical and the digital.
So I might take a little bit of a different approach to design. I think what I'm about to say is a little more commonplace, but maybe the way that I personally produce work is slightly different using the digital technology and treating everything more like a sketch. But design for me is exploratory. I don't necessarily know what's going to happen when I enter 3D space, when I, go out, explore, survey the environment, uncover new and interesting features. Sometimes it looks like being in CAD, hand sketching, and just producing gestures or certain concepts that are relevant to, the space in which I live. So in the case of Brooklyn, these post-industrial sites, many of which abandoned, we have this incredible sprawling infrastructure that is not really for people, but it is for things that exists everywhere and takes up a large amount of space. So upon surveying that, I think you start having ideas, you start coming up with creative ways to tackle those ideas as well. Everything from sandbags to like blowy graffiti in industrial sites is raw material, conceptual material that can be leveraged and then explored and interrogated in design software to produce something that is functional. Because at the end of the day, design has to work, but
Mhm.
I might be a little more concept forward than other designers. Nothing wrong with an industrial designer who wants to make a beautiful functional item, but I think the concept, especially in our current world, the world of social media, where you really have to grab people, concept makes object shine and sort of transcend, the beautiful things that we use every single day. A real, a real authentic concept, I think pushes the work above and beyond.
Yeah. Hey, everything is design, right?
Everything is designed. Yeah, this is kind of what I'm getting at. Like if you go the straight industrial design lane, that's great. We have a billion objects and we have more objects we can count. We'll always need them. At the same time, if you can instill in those objects some sense of context, some poetry, some artistic merit, I think that's a really interesting space to explore.
So when beginning a design, where do you start? Do you start with a tangible form in mind, or from emotion, or from a
Right.
movement?
It's what I think some of the things you pointed out overlap in interesting ways. Like I was just saying, I concept is a big part of it. Thinking of encountering something in the world and saying, actually, this is not, you know, a purely functional object. This has some human merit and can be leveraged for human experience. That's one way to start. The You saw forms of blowy graffiti, but in design itself, in the actual CAD software, I'm a big fan of digital first processes because counterintuitively, the computer is now how we interface with manufacturing and how we make things. So some people historically would hand sketch,
Yeah.
translate that to 3D software, and then produce it. I bypass the middleman, and I'm most competent in these CAD softwares where I can be most free. But also within CAD, the nice thing is it constrains you in very pragmatic ways. So you're not just hand sketching and being super expressive. I'm exploring concept, but within spatial systems, within real dimension, and thinking of object and concept at the same time, and sort of playing between those. It's a really interesting process. And getting back to motion, you know, moving your mouse around on a screen is the same thing as drawing and sketching on a pad, but with those functional constraints, those commands, and slightly filtered and processed through things that help. They're like how should I describe it? They're like helpful constraints so that everything is not so freeform that it becomes chaotic. It helps confine and control based against real human dimensions, real volume, real material.
Yeah, that's interesting though. So I'm curious also what gives the objects that you make that sense of life, because I would say that many of your designs actually feel almost like living sculptures.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I don't know. I think everybody has a form. Maybe the way in which I work allows me to produce work that is a little more authentic to me. But I naturally tend towards these soft forms that defy the rigid material constraints of our reality. So there's what I'm describing here is a tension, right? Because we just talked about constraints being really helpful, but then also it's pushing back and interrogating those constraints. Like we don't take a tree trunk now, carve into it by hand. We stack layers of plywood, we CNC mill them, we stack upholstery foam, these really square rectilinear materials. And they're square for a reason, right? It's the easiest way to ship it. It's the easiest way to stack it. And we're talking again about these sort of in-between spaces, the spaces of logistics, of manufacturing. I want to interrogate that space. How can you take these stock materials, defy them in a smart and functional way? Uh, and part of that is actually breaking the mold, exploring soft forms, soft edges. And, you know, we start to blur the lines between art and functional design. If you take the glove couch, for instance, which is still, I think, maybe the most essential thing that we've ever produced, it's an extruded line that's been thickened. And at first, when you look at it, unlike a traditional couch, you don't necessarily know how to sit on it, but very quickly you explore it and you intuit that you sit between the curved elements in the crease, which is very unlike a traditional sofa. But by working in 3D as a sculptor, uh, you have these really incredibly emergent properties and characteristics that are extremely comfortable. They are functional, but they're not the norm. They're not the default. So that's the space in which I like to play, pushing back against constraints, acknowledging them, and the tension between the two.
Mm. So is it now then after it's done, because it's more exploratory, do you need to like kind of sort of educate the users on how to use it? Because I'm pretty sure it's outside of their norm, you know?
It is outside of the norm. But it's really interesting because it might shock at first, and that's kind of the quality that I want to instill in people is
Mm.
like surprise. Not shock is not the word. I think surprise is a better word. But very quickly, you try it and you intuit how it actually works.
Oh, yeah,
But
it makes sense like that.
yeah, because again, you're not used to a sofa functioning like that. But when your body like interfaces with the object itself, it's it's pretty clear where you should go, right? It's baked into the form factor. So I love those moments of surprise and delight within the work. And I think a lot of industrial designers sort of bypass that or push that out the window in favor of raw pragmatism. These objects, in my opinion, again, blur the lines between functional design and art, sculpture. And I think that's important. And I think it's authentic to me.
That's super cool. So I'm curious about your take on post-industrial design and how is your practice influenced by it?
So the reason I've lived in cities all of my life, and post-industrial design is my attempt at looking at these leftover spaces, these huge spaces that don't exist for people, they exist for objects, and acknowledging that that is the context, that is the I mean, that's the space. Those are the spaces in which objects are made. I think very many people bypass that entirely. They look at the object, they look at the end product, but there's a lot of raw emotion. It's almost like a sci-fi landscape if you think about it. The human has been removed, the spaces exist for the objects, and there's really some emergent beauty in there. And there's a reason that we photographed the glove couch in that storage site for sand. It was something, that was just it was a storage site in Brooklyn. We encountered it. We thought it looked like another planet. And it's kind of incredible that this becomes the scenery, the backdrop for the production of the work, but also the capturing of the work after it's built.
Mm. So, lastly, as design keeps moving forward, how do you stay connected to the past or to memory, to traditions, or simply as to where things come from?
Yeah, I'm obsessed really personally with the now, but the interesting thing about operating in the now is that we live in a world with the internet where we have the accumulation of all human knowledge, all historical precedent everywhere, right? So every moment of history exists in the now in this internet landscape where we have access to all of these precedents at the click of a button. It's a really incredible time to be a designer. I think it's easy to despair because the world is not always perfect, but it's really hard because we live in this context to acknowledge that we have incredible opportunities to make some of the best work that's ever existed because we have access to all the work that's come before us, unlike any other generation in human history. So, precedent for me, capturing images, exploring materials, it can be form, concept, material, a fabrication technique, and archiving. And honestly, I'm probably more akin to an archivist in the way that I capture concepts, capture those materials as quick notes, and then interrogate them through my own design lens. Let's say robotic knitting is an emergent technology that's existed for a while, but how do you deploy that artfully towards the end of producing, a 15-foot sculpture, something like that? That's the kind of way in which we play an idea from the past or an idea from the present, and then applying it in a context that is new, that is innovative and interesting, and sort of strikes a chord with myself. And I know if it strikes a chord with me, it will strike a chord with other people as well.
That's super cool. Yeah, thank you so much. I think you really reveal how, designing in the quote unquote in between is less about, chasing novelty and more about maybe navigating the tension between archive and invention, right?
Yeah,
Digital,
absolutely.
and we don't always have to make something that's entirely new, but maybe how we also can thoughtfully remix what already exists and create something from what's already existing, but twist it in a different way.
Yeah, and one more point on that I think is really fascinating is again in this moment where we have all this archival content, where we have so much technology available to us and unlimited possibilities to create, to fabricate. I think that this moment actually allows us to be more authentic and more human if you use that material correctly. Contrary to popular belief, technology does not take the human out of the equation. I would
Mm,
argue it allows you to more fully express and put out the work that you want to put out.
yeah. And study more with the open access to information, right?
100%. I think people have the capacity to be better designers, more informed designers, producing work that is, more relevant or at least relevant to this moment. And that's a beautiful thing at the end of the day.
I agree. Yeah, what a nice chat. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for having me.